But if the value also went up by 5%, so the 5% on the 600,000, which is $30,000 again, I put down 30,000, but the value went up 30,000, that's 100% return on my money. This is a special episode of the Jazz Takhar podcast. Yes, I'm sure it looks completely different. Both Alto and I are in the back of a bus today because we just finished an amazing condo tour where we went around the GTA and took a look and documented about 10 to 12 condos that a lot of our clients purchased and invested in within the last, I would say, about 2 years or so. So what we wanted to do, though, because about a year and a half ago, Laura, we both did what was dubbed as the pre-construction / new build investing masterclass, and I thought it was time to do a 2.0 version.
Yeah, we did that via Zoom, so
Yes.
it's because of, the pandemic that was
Exactly.
going on at the time. So it's nice to be able to do it like this. In a bus is weird because I usually only enter these buses for like party situations.
Well,
you know?
look, I mean, we had an awesome team around us today. We didn't party per se. We did use this for work, but we had a lot of fun, as we always do. You and I spoke about this obviously all day long today. How cool it was to see some of the condos that our investors invested into feel like just buying through a blueprint.
Yeah.
Right?
I got to tell you, I think it's so cool because when I got into real estate, like it always interested me to work with people who wanted to tear down a house and build a new house because I'm like, you're like changing the face of a little neighborhood. And then I started working with new build condos, and that to me opened my eyes. Like, I'm not now changing like a street and how a street looks or helping to change it. I'm helping to change the skyline of a city because we've helped a couple hundred purchasers over the course of the last couple years buy new build condos, and now we're seeing them, some are completed, and then everything else we're seeing them come up. And it's like when you're driving down the highway into the city, either down the Gardner or the DVP, and you start to see all these condos popping up, and it's just so, it gives me so much joy and pride to know that I helped people purchase those condos, and that's why those buildings exist.
Look, you said a couple of hundred. It's actually been in the last 8 years. I've been doing this for 16 years, but 8 years when we started to really focus a lot of our attention on what the inventory was here in the GTA, which was new builds, both homes and condos, but primarily condos because we mention it all the time. There's really no space to build out this way anymore in the GTA. You can only go upwards.
Yeah, we call it the Manhattanization effect of Toronto, essentially.
What does that really mean? Well, actually, before I even ask you that question, I wanted to just finish my point in terms of our numbers. In the last 8 years, we've helped over 2,100, mostly investors, some end users, invest into this strategy, which is new build investing. Today's episode is going to be all about how we actually do the due diligence on picking these projects, what incentives you need to look for, and how you actually make money when it comes to investing into this strategy. And then most importantly, in my opinion, and obviously yours, because that's the role that you play here as the VP of REC Canada, where you actually walk everyone through the process, hold their hand. If we were in the studio, you'd see the big sign that says removing friction, and we have that there for a reason because we want to make it as easy as possible for you to either buy, sell, or invest with us. In this situation is that it's actually going through that process because there's a 10-day due diligence that all investors automatically get in Ontario, and you walk them through that. But you said the Manhattanization effect. What is that?
Yeah, essentially here in Toronto, we have a unique situation in that the government implemented what was called the Greenbelt legislation, which essentially stopped building in a certain area around the outskirts of Toronto. And so you can only build south of that area, right? And then south of Toronto, you have the lake. And so we've kind of created this little island, which meant that real estate on that island became more expensive, like Manhattan. And so what we saw was that we can't build out, so we can only build up. And again, making that anyone who was closer to the downtown core, that became the most lucrative real estate. And so we've seen values go up, just as you would in other major cities around the world, particularly Manhattan.
Now, when purchasing and or investing into a new build, homes and condos it's slightly different in terms of the actual process of getting into one, but there's major similarities. But today, for today's sake, and just in terms of time, we're going to be speaking about actually investing into a pre-construction condo. So let's get right into it. How do we do the due diligence, right? And so we get a little over 65 to 70 projects now every single year. That's how many projects, talking about the Manhattanization. In fact, that's the only properties that are coming out. That's the only inventory. That's how we get about 65 to say 70 a year.
And that's how many, like there's more than that. That's the ones that kind of come on our desk because those developers know of us. But that's how many, guys, think about, that's the number of projects that are being built in the Greater Toronto area every single year.
Well, there's, as you mentioned, there's even more than that, right? But now, out of that 65 to 70, we only really get loud and some would say obnoxious about, I'm going to say about 8 to 10 of those.
Yeah.
And the reason is first and foremost, we're always looking at location. Why? Because the location in itself, well, obviously you can't pick up the building and move it, but it's going to determine so much. Number one for me, primarily before being a real estate broker, yourself as well, my business partner, Simos as well, I mean, we're investors. We're always looking for deals. So when we're looking for those opportunities, we're going to make sure, okay, this location, why is this either a good location, a AAA location, or not a AAA location? And for us, that's based on primarily transit. Why? Because if you look back to 100 years of real estate, the world real estate, I mean the Londons, the Tokyos, the Paris, the Shanghais, the Singapores, the Manhattans, if you actually look at what happens to values in and around transit. In fact, Harvard did a study, Laura, I think it was back in 2017, 2016, where they looked at what happens to values as well as the rentability of condos and homes under a 500-meter radius around transit. It's the highest, but there's some other things that location determines as well.
Yeah, I think we like to look at, so as you mentioned, transit. The other thing we like to look at is this a master plan community, right? So what does that mean? A master plan community usually has 3 levels of government who are putting money into a specific area.
At least a couple of levels, right? And sometimes it's not all 3.
Yeah, sometimes it's not all 3, but in many cases it is. And they're looking to regentrify an entire area, an entire block. And usually that means a number of condo projects, not by the same developer necessarily. You're going to have commercial space in there. You're going to have retail space in there. You're essentially creating a city within a city so that people can, we say, live, work, and play all within the same area. So they don't necessarily need as much access to transit because everything that they need is within that little community that they're building.
And you mentioned commercial, right? You got to think about it. Businesses are going to come where residents are going to be, because that's when the Starbucks is and the Tim Hortons and the Costco.
Well, they all want access to good employees.
For sure.
So they're always trying to find where's the next best place where we're going to find access to this pool of talented people.
Now, we're also looking for employment. You said employees. We're looking to see, okay, is this location going to be a good place for offices to come to? So you talk about the master plan communities and a lot of areas in the GTA. I mean, just to name a few, if you look at the east side of downtown Toronto, the Distillery District, there was the 3 levels of government. They put in $1.2 billion back in 2015, okay, to completely redevelop the Distillery District of downtown Toronto. In fact, like when I went there back in 2015, it was like I was walking through one of those old Western movies, right? Like the tumbleweeds. Now we went there today, big shout out to Yas and Nikki for all the B-roll that they got, but you'll see what's happened there. You'll see what's happening.
It's completely changed.
Well, they put an 18-acre park, man-made 18-acre park there. They have Canada's largest underbridge park. Really cool, right? The skateboarding, the basketball nets. But then you started to see a little over 15 to 16 buildings already built.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look back, some of the clients who purchased back in 2015, they had to have some foresight, right? They had to have some foresight where back in 15, tumbleweeds are blowing, But
yeah, you're probably thinking at that time, like, I don't know if I should invest here. Is this neighborhood really going to take off? Right now, it looks awful.
well, it's hard to envision
It's
as
hard.
well.
It's really hard. Like, you got to dream.
Yes.
You got to dream here.
For sure. And they were purchasing them back, and you guys can tell we're in the back of a bus. We're outside. I mean, there's noise coming.
Thanks, motorcycle.
We're in the city right now. Back in 2015, they were purchasing them for approximately, on average, price per square foot for about $450 to $500 price per square foot. If you're watching or you're listening,
believe it.
right, and while you're driving or taking your dog for a walk, how do you come up with the average price per square foot? You get the purchase price, you take the average square footage in the building, and you come up with the average price per square foot. So $450 to $500.
And that seemed expensive at the time. People were telling you, I remember this, like, Jazz, you know, who's going to buy here? Who's going to be able to afford this? This is crazy. The bubble, it's all going to burst. We're all going to die.
Well, that was the first building out of the 1516.
Yeah.
Okay. But I am along with our team. Okay. I purchased in there as well, though. But I got into the third building. But the first building was $450 to $500 price per square foot. The third building that I got into, Laura, was close to $675 to $700. Then the fourth building came. And I was telling people, this is going to continue to go up. I think they thought I was like on some type of crack or something.
Like, Jazz, this is the max.
This
There's
is
no
the max.
way.
Today, time of this recording, fall 2021, that area right now in new builds is like flirting around $1,250 to $1,300 price per square foot.
So you're kicking yourself now because you wish you probably bought 5.
100%.
Even in phase 3.
100%.
Even in phase 3.
Well, look, I mean, and actual purchase prices, that means first building, $275,000. Right now, today, over $700,000. We're talking about a 6 to 7 year period.
So now let's think of what's going to happen to those values in another 6 to 7 years.
Well, I think it's safe to say in the last 100 years, and this is not us, you know, we left the crystal ball in our office in the studio today. We didn't bring it with us, but let's use history as our teacher. Last 100 years, every single decade, what's happened to values? On average.
On average, they've doubled.
They've doubled.
They've doubled.
We just went through a period of time. If you're watching and listening and if you own a home, you know in the last 5 years, it's probably went up more than just double,
and
right?
Here's the thing. That even takes into account any types of dips. Like in 2017, we had all this government intervention to try and curb some of the demand. We had mortgage stress test changes. And in the end, like, maybe prices weren't growing at the same rate, but it didn't really do much because we never fixed the supply side.
And then we had something happen that we've never happened in 100 years, which was a pandemic, like, and a lockdown. And still in the GTA, values continue to rise. That's location.
Yeah.
All wrapped up in hopefully in a nice little bow for everybody who's watching and listening. Now, the next thing is builder. Why is the builder so important, Laura?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you want to purchase with a developer who has a great reputation. How do you know what a great reputation is? Well, I'd say take a look around. Has the builder built and completed other buildings in the past? What's their, what do people talk about them online? Do they have a good reputation in terms of, did they build what they said they were going to build? We definitely don't want to be the guinea pig for any type of developer who's never done this before. They don't necessarily know how to get permits and construction financing, and they don't. And the reason is with that is because the one real risk to buying new builds is that developers can cancel the project.
Well, as always, I was going to say, you always steal my thunder, so continue, because that was going to be what I was going to talk about.
Oh, okay. But I want to make it clear, because everyone's probably like, oh my gosh, they can just cancel the project, and then what happens to all my money? Your money is safe. Any deposits that you have made in the year, 2 years before the developer finally, throws their hands up and says we're canceling, all that is held in a lawyer's trust account. That money never actually goes to the developer. So you get all that money back. The problem is that money, unfortunately, didn't necessarily make you any money in that time.
Well,
so
and then
that's
you lose
the
the
real
opportunity
risk.
cost on that
Exactly.
money, right? So, I mean, you did a fantastic job talking about the builder. So far, you check mark the location, you check mark the builder. The third thing that we're looking at, part of our due diligence, to make sure that it's going to be one of the 8 to 10 to 12 projects a year. I think the max we've ever done is maybe 12, is the incentives. And the top incentive that you need to make sure that you're getting or that you're part of is first access pricing. Because if you're driving and you see one of those big A-frame signs on the sidewalk of a sales center and it says open to the public, and you walk in and they show you suites and they're willing to actually sell you a suite at the sales center. This is not the
Yeah.
salesperson's fault, but I just want you to know the stage that it's at in terms of the pricing. At that point, it's probably at stage 5 to 6.
So needless to say, you are way too late.
Way too late, and look, as an end user, if you're going to live in there, you might be okay. I mean, every circumstance is different, but when we're speaking to investors, you cannot buy that late in the stage, in the process. Why? Because the value's already gone up, because the builder themselves forced the appreciation. Probably anywhere from, I'm going to say, in the 8 years that we've been doing this, I've seen anywhere from about 70 to upwards to about $110,000. And that's only in the 5th or 6th stage. So the importance of buying in first access is that you can save $80,000 to $100,000. Look, $7,000 or $8,000 is one thing, but when we're talking that kind of money, I mean, as an investor, the numbers just don't make sense.
Yeah, that's really how you win.
Move to the next project.
Move to the next project. There's always another project. That's the good news here, and particularly with us, because we really, select only a couple projects, we'll just say, just wait. Just wait 2-3 months, whatever it is. We'll find you another great project and you'll get first access pricing. You may as well be the one that's taking advantage of those price increases. Don't let the developer win.
Exactly. And so from first access to the second allocation or the third allocation, we're talking about $15,000 to $18,000. But then the second to the third is another 18 to 20. See, contrary to what a lot of the public think, that the builder wants to sell out their whole building in a weekend. It's just not true. Why? Because they want to be able to increase the pricing. It works for their performer. They're investors as well. They're in fact putting in hundreds of millions of dollars into a development. They want to make sure that their performers look just as good as we want your performer.
And it's really based on supply and demand,
so true.
Right? So the developer's really testing the waters. They're trying to get a sense of what's the street saying? Are people excited about this project? How many worksheets did we get in? Worksheets being you putting up your hand saying that you're interested in a unit. We call them reservation forms. Worksheets, it's the same thing. And then the developer, based on that, will kind of deploy a strategy on how they can increase pricing so they can maximize how much money they make. So it's really, really important that you get in right at that first stage.
Okay, so first access pricing. Let's go over a couple of the other incentives that we need to make sure are in writing when you're looking at an agreement of purchase and sale for a new build condo. The second one that I always like to make sure as an investor is that you have the right to lease it, the right to rent it out during occupancy, because there's 2 stages when it comes to a condo. There's occupancy and there's registration. Laura, explain the difference between the occupancy and registration.
Yeah, so here in Ontario, I feel like this is a phenomenon that's mostly Ontario-based or GTA-based. Essentially what happens is the building is now built. Any of you who've been in a new condo, you can probably picture this, right? The building's built, it looks good. There might still be some workers in and around working on the gym and some of the amenities on the inside. There's still the boards up in the elevator, or like the material up in the elevator. People are moving in. You can move in. It's safe. It's undergone all the safety inspections. You can move in. But what hasn't happened yet is that condo hasn't been registered as a condominium corporation with the city. So you're thinking, well, how long can that take? Well, in some cases, it takes anywhere between 6 and 8 months for that to happen. So instead of the developer pushing off letting people move in, they're going to say, sure, you can move in. We're not selling this to you yet, i.e. you're not getting title to this unit yet. You're also not getting a mortgage on occupancy. That's not going to happen until closing, but feel free to move in. Here's the caveat. You as an investor, you're not moving in. And during this time, no matter what, as an owner, you're paying an occupancy fee. That occupancy fee is mostly made up of your maintenance fee. You're going to be paying that on closing anyways. Your property taxes, again, you're going to be paying that on closing anyways. The one difference is you're paying a small portion of the interest that the developer is paying for your unit. But when you add up those expenses, it's less than what you'll be paying on closing because you don't have a mortgage here. Again, you have not closed on the unit. But no matter what, whether you're an end user or an investor, you're going to be paying that fee during that time. If you can't rent it out during this time, you're going to be out of pocket all that money. So that's a huge disadvantage. And so we only work with developers who say, okay, I get that I own it and I might not want to deal with a tenant. But I'm going to allow you to actually rent it out during this time to a tenant, right? And that's where we come in because we help our investors find the tenant for a year. So we'll help them place the tenant, get them in, get it approved with the developer, and then we move over to the closing period, which again is about a 6 to 8 month period. So it's very, very important that you have that, because we've taken essentially your highest negative cash flowing time and we've flipped it on its head and made it the most positive cash flow you'll see.
So you got to make sure that you actually have it in writing. It's a clause in an amendment that's written out that pretty much says that you have the right to lease / rent the unit out during occupancy. Laura, you mentioned that you don't actually need to get a mortgage at occupancy. The mortgage is needed at registration, which happens 6 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 months later. It could be a little bit more at times.
Yeah.
If the taller the building, the longer it's going to be, because they got to make sure that they occupy a certain amount of floors at certain times. The shorter the building, the smaller the building, the quicker that occupancy time is. The next incentive that, in my opinion, is a must-have in writing is the right to assign. On the street, you hear probably someone flipping the paper. Essentially, what you're doing and what you need in writing is the ability to sell your agreement of purchase and sale to another purchaser, that purchaser being an end user or an investor. Why do you need to have this? Why is it so important? Well, for me as an investor, look, I'm buying something today for something that's going to be built out in 3 to 3.5 years down the road. Life happens. You might go run into financial hardship. You might just have a change at heart about investing, but you're locked into this contract. And so as long as you're able to sell it to somebody else 98% of the time for, big profit, because remember, from when you buy this to when it actually gets built, we see anywhere from $150 to $170 to $200,000 in profit. That's how much the value goes up. And so as long as you can actually sell it to somebody else, it is the best parachute security blanket that actually exists.
Well, and in all honesty, some investors do go into purchasing new build condos with the strategy of assigning or flipping the paper. They really have no intention of closing on the unit, which can be very, very lucrative, because as you mentioned, there can be a lot of profit to be made. The only warning I would give to that is that, let's say there's pandemic 2.0 in the future that we didn't account for, and prices kind of halted or maybe dropped, because that's what happens. Again, real estate goes up and down upwards, and you're at that point where you're forced to sell. You might be selling at a loss. I have never seen it, but that is a possibility.
Yeah,
and so, we always tell people, like, go in with the intention of closing if you can, because that's really going to be the safest type of investment.
And the safest, and look, our macro thesis on investing, specifically in real estate, is to buy and hold. Use this as the security blanket. Don't go into it knowing that you're going to do the assignment unless you've done it a couple of times. If you've been in the market, you've been an investor a few times over, then look, you know what you're getting yourself into. If this is your first time investing into real estate, first time investing into this strategy, maybe even your second time, we strongly advise only move forward with a unit and investing if you have and you know that you're going to actually hold on to this property, close on the property, rent it out. Because remember, what happens every single decade on average here in the GTA? The values double. That's how you create massive wealth in real estate. The wealth in real estate is created by holding on to property. There's a reason our slogan at REC Canada is, I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
Because we're just tired of hearing from people saying, I wish I had kept that property.
Yeah, and you know what?
Right?
And anyone who we've spoken to who has sold their property, 9 times out of 10 what we hear is, I wish I held on to it, right? I wish I figured out a way to hold on to it.
I've made that mistake a couple of times. Yeah. You'd think the first time
I didn't want to out you, but
well,
all right.
It's okay. It's all good. I've made that mistake a couple of times over, and both times looking back, I'm like, oh my God, that property's like $600,000, $800,000 more than when I sold it. Not from when I bought it, from when I actually sold it. Last incentive I want to make sure that everyone gets on paper. If they do this with us, if they don't do it with us, you got to make sure, and this is, this has to do with the whole conversation we're having today. Great if you do this with us. We pre-negotiate all of this. You will not be going into an agreement of purchase and sale without us having all this in writing. However, if you do it with your cousin Charlie or someone else, then we want to make sure that you have all this in writing. It's the cap development charges.
Yeah, so the cap development charges are really important because what happens on closing? So again, now let's fast forward to that closing date that I mentioned, the final closing where you're taking title. That's when you're getting the mortgage to your unit. That's when you're going to be paying all of your closing fees. In this case, you're going to be paying what's called development charges. So in the past, if a developer had not capped them, they could be as high as $35,000. Why? What are these charges? Essentially, on closing, the city is going to say, okay, thank you, developer. You're now a condominium corporation, and here is your taxes, fees, and levies that you owe us. What are these things? Like, what are these fees for? Well, when you build new condos, we got to change the sewers, we got to change the streets, we got to put in stoplights, we got to put in new schools. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes around to supporting the people who are going to live in those condos, right? Somebody has to pay for that. Don't you think it should be, at least in part, the people who are going to be living and taking advantage of all those things? And so the government gives the developer their fees, and the developer says thank you and passes it along to you, the buyer. The problem isn't that there are these fees. We get it. The problem really is that we don't know what the fees are going to be in the future. So how do you know what to save for? If it's $35,000 and you expected it to be $5,000, you're going to be like on closing, like, oh my gosh, where am I going to find $30,000?
Well, you don't want those kind of surprises, as you
don't
mentioned.
want those kind of surprises. And so we say, okay, developer, we understand that there's going to be fees. Can you just cap them for us? Let us know what it is. So whether it's, $10,000, $15,000, let us know what it's going to be now. Put it in writing. So what does a cap mean? That essentially means that if on closing the fee is $10,000 but your cap was $15,000, then you'll only pay $10,000. So that's great. You saved $5,000. I always tell you though, expect to pay the $15,000. Make sure you save it. The other side of the equation is, let's say it comes in at $20,000, but your cap is $15,000. Then you'll only be required to pay the $15,000, and the developer will be required to pay the difference.
Now, there's one more thing that's very important when you're thinking about investing into a new build condo. We talked about not having any surprises, and that's the HST. What happens here in Ontario is that when you're purchasing a new build condo, you automatically have to pay, as an investor, $24,000 at closing for the HST payment. Now, I got some good news for you, okay? It's not the 13%. It's only a max of up to $24,000. But as long as you show the CRA that you're going to be renting this property out, which if you did it with us, we were going to be renting it for you for the first year and helping you manage it at no cost. We would have done that for you at occupancy. But at registration is when you pay that $24,000. But what we also do is have a form filled out for you. We staple, yes, we still staple things. We staple a 1-year lease agreement, send that to the CRA, and within 6 to 8 weeks, you get back almost all of that $24,000. It's in and around $23,300.
Yeah, I always say, look, the government had to open your application, so someone had to sit there and do it. So you're going to pay for them to do that, right?
Right.
Nothing comes for free.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, except this masterclass for anybody who's watching on YouTube or listening on all the podcast platforms. So, Laura, we spoke about location. We spoke about builder. We spoke about all the incentives. Yep. Don't do any of this. We talked about the importance of making sure that you get in first access pricing. Let's just quickly speak about why we have seen a little over 2,100 of our investors do this strategy. And for me, because I've done this personally a few times over now, it was because the second I learned that in Ontario, I have, as an investor, have to put down 20%. But with this strategy on a new build condo, I'm allowed to spread that 20% out over the 3-year period, meaning generally speaking, and it depends, it's project based, but generally speaking, you're looking at 5% in year 1, 5 to 10% broken up in year 2, and then the final 5% in year 3. That allows me to save. It becomes an amazing forced savings plan.
Yeah, because you have those deposits coming up, right? So you have to save for them. So the good news is you don't need the cash all on you today. You don't need all 20% in your bank account today to pay for it like you would with a resale.
And now that's how I've been able to get anywhere from 50 to sometimes 100% return on my money. And let me just quickly explain that. If I'm looking at a $600,000 condo and I put down 5% in year one, that's $30,000. But if the value also went up by 5%, so the 5% on the 600,000, which is $30,000 again, I put down 30,000, but the value went up 30,000. That's 100% return on my money. How cool is that, right? It's very rare to see those type of returns anywhere else.
It kind of makes it sound silly for even saying it, because who's going to believe it? But that's really how it works.
Well, let's cut that in half. You know, I'm the son of a taxi driver and a factory worker, and I saw them pinch pennies my whole life, and so I always like to speak about being ultra conservative. So let's think about 2.5% appreciation. You put down 5% on that 600,000, that's 30,000. Let's just say the value went up only by 2.5% of 15,000. You still saw 50% return on your money. And it's the most passive investment that you possibly can do, because it's literally just writing checks until the building gets built.
Signing agreements, and then waiting. It's actually really boring.
It's like watching paint dry, some would say.
Really it is.
The other thing is you don't have to get a mortgage. And I mean, that was one of the main reasons that you did this the first time around. If you haven't seen Laura's video and her podcast episode on her first investment, we documented it all. I know that's what kind of really got your juices flowing about this investment, because you didn't have to get a mortgage right away.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, a lot of people, they'll say, well, I can't afford something, but I do have money in the bank. And it's like, well, you can afford something. This is one of those strategies that work. They say they can't afford it really because their mortgage broker or the bank told them that right now they're too leveraged, they can't get anything. Here's the great part with this strategy. You don't need the mortgage until closing. So let's say it's a 3-year build out. I know you were using 3 years. That's usually 3 years until occupancy. And let's be honest, there are usually delays when it comes to new build construction. So whatever the occupancy date that they've stipulated is, I always say add on additional, I'd say 6 to 8 months for delays, right? So now you've hit occupancy. You don't need a mortgage yet. So it's another probably 6 to 8 months after that until the closing actually happens. Yep. So now we're looking at 4.5 years from now. In that 4.5 year period of time, that allows you to get all your ducks in a row, to work with a mortgage broker who says, look, if we do this and we do this and we do this, we should be able to get you a mortgage on closing. And so it gives you all this time and flexibility really to sort it all out.
Now, the driver's waving me down. We're getting really close back to our headquarters after this long drive, after the long condo tour that we've done. I do want you to touch on something that's very important. So, as the investor, as the purchaser, they've now picked their unit. They got their agreement of purchase and sale, okay? They've signed the agreement of purchase and sale. We tell them all the time, look, in Ontario, automatically, you get this 10-day due diligence period. So again, if you look back to the content and inside the studio, there's a massive sign behind my head that says ready, fire, aim. And that's as a reminder that in real estate, you can tie up property and then do the due diligence. And so sign the agreement for purchase and sale. And I know, like we've always been told, don't sign anything until
you read it.
Until you read it and get the lawyer to review it. But here it works slightly different. Why? Because there's so much demand that what we want you to do is tie it up. You do that by signing the agreement of purchase and sale, and then sit back, put your feet up. Hopefully you're watching this while you're in the process right now in the 10-day due diligence period, where you're going to be dealing with someone like Laura. What do you do? What happens in this 10 days?
Yeah.
What does somebody need to make sure that they get checked off,
I love
Laura?
this period because, as you mentioned,
I'm glad that you love it, because
I tell people
this is what you do all day.
This is what I do. So this is when I get to tell everyone to take a deep breath, because what they've already done was the hard part, and that was tying up a unit, as you mentioned. That part goes so fast. It's like, sign the agreement, like immediately. We need to get a check, and all these things are happening, and it's very, very fast. But now once it's signed and we're in the 10-day due diligence period, that again comes automatically in the province of Ontario, you get to just relax for a second. And what I do for our clients is I'm going to introduce you to a lawyer, a pre-construction new build lawyer who's done this hundreds of times. They know what they're looking for. The agreement of purchase and sale is around 40 pages, give or take. And then along with that, you get about a 150-page document that's called the condominium documents. I have no expectation that you're actually going to read that, because it's really boring.
Well, unless you want to put yourself to sleep.
It's so boring, and it's tedious. And a lot of these things, like it's legal jargon in that a lot of people just don't necessarily understand. So we make sure that the lawyer reviews it, and what they'll usually do is provide you with an email summary of the agreement. They'll say, yes, all those incentives that Jazz promised you are actually in this agreement. And then they'll also point out a couple things that they think that you need to know. They'll talk about the closing costs and everything you need to know for closing. And so they kind of like walk you through the agreement and point you to all the important pages, and then you can go and review those. The other thing that we do during this time is get what's called a mortgage pre-approval letter. What does that mean? You always say this. It's not even worth the paper that is printed on.
Well, especially of late, we know what the value of toilet paper did. I mean, this is worth less than that for sure now. It's a complete formality that the builder needs to get. They're going to put it in their file to show their bank to qualify for the construction financing. And so, look, it's very odd, right? To get a pre-approval for something that you're buying today that's going to be built for 3.5 years from now, but it's just part of the process. It is what it is, for lack of a better term.
And anything
right?
can happen during that 3-4 year period, right? So it really doesn't mean anything because you have to go through the process of qualifying for an actual mortgage on closing anyway.
And that's why it's a formality.
Yeah.
But again, that's why one of the main reasons that I know you invested, probably 50% of our insiders and our investors like this strategy because of the fact, well, look, it doesn't tie up my ability to go get other mortgages. It doesn't show up on the radar when you go to a bank or you go to a lender or when you go to an independent mortgage broker. So you can be tied into a property, taking advantage of the market appreciation over the 3 to 4 years, but it doesn't tie up the ability to go get other mortgages. Wow, Laura, I think we did a fantastic job. I like to think so. I know you do.
Well, you always think you do a fantastic job.
That I did it.
Yes.
I never said, if
No,
I
I
said
know.
we, we're going to edit that part out because I mean but most importantly, you let us know how we did. Let us know in the comments. I hope you're watching this before you've actually made a decision. But if you're already in your 10-day due diligence period, make sure you have all those incentives in place. And even if you bought it with someone else, guys, don't worry, the pie's big enough. We're okay with that. Let us know if you needed a second set of eyes on your agreement, on the investment opportunity, on the location, on the builder. Just shoot us an email. We're not hard to find. I mean, we do a lot of content on all the platforms. Elto, would you like to say anything to...
All I want to say is if you guys do choose to purchase something with us in the future, I am definitely looking forward to helping you through the 10-day due diligence period.
You guys have an awesome night. Take care.